Is Lucifer the devil? Now, I think you know that most people, and it has been this way for a long time, understand that Lucifer is the personal name of the devil, otherwise called Satan. But so is this the case? Well, the only place in the Bible where this word Lucifer appears is in Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12, and in particular, the King James translation. So let's take a look at it. The context does not actually associate Lucifer with the devil. In fact, the devil's not mentioned in any way in the passage. And in fact, the Bible tells us actually that what is being said about Lucifer is addressed to the king of Babylon. And so, no, I don't believe that this is a reference to the devil at all. Even though that is a very popular idea and it has been believed for a long time and by a lot of people, of course that doesn't make it so. The context actually doesn't say anything about the devil and names the particular person that it's addressing, and it isn't the devil. But let's take a look at it and read some of what is said here, and we'll have more to say in a little bit about the word Lucifer itself. Now, I'm reading from the King James. Now, Isaiah 14 is a chapter that is found among many chapters where God is giving several oracles, or that is speeches of doom, if you will, to different nations for their wickedness and pronouncements of judgments and wrath upon these nations. But in verse 4 it says this, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. Now notice that it is addressed to the king of Babylon. There was an actual nation and actually had a king. So this is the king of Babylon. Now, I'll say more about that in a second, but how hath the oppressor ceased? And what you're going to find here is this is spoken as if God has already carried out his judgment. This is how certain it is. In other words, this is something that is going to be said once I'm done with what I'm going to do. But it says, how hath the oppressor seized? The golden city seized, referring to Babylon, the capital. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked. By the way, Nineveh was the capital of Babylon. And the scepter of the rulers. So it says the Lord hath broken the staff and the scepter. These are symbols. The kings and rulers would have scepters and staffs. And so it's symbolically saying God has destroyed their rule, their reign. He has removed them from their position of power. He who smote or struck the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger. Now this is the king of Babylon is talking about. Is persecuted, and none hindereth or stops it. He's persecuted. That is by God. God is afflicting him. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. In other words, now that the ruler of Babylon, who's been the oppressor of these other nations and has dominated them, his rulership, his reign has been destroyed by God. And now the earth, so to speak, the land, the word could also be translated land, the Hebrew word, that where these other governments and empires exist, it's now at rest because he is not oppressing them through his rule. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing like a celebration. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee. This is very poetic language. And the cedars, the trees of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, in other words, laid down like in rest, you've been killed, no feller has come up against us. We have all this rest. We're not oppressed by some tyrant king anymore. Since thou art laid down, no feller has come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. Now, hell in the Old Testament is the word Sheol. Now, it's important to know, even though I'm trying to be brief here, but the word hell is Sheol and does not refer to what we commonly refer to as hell. We talk about hell as if it's a future place of punishment for the wicked. But the word Sheol simply means the place where the dead go, whether you're righteous or wicked. It's like all people that die go to Sheol, like the pit. So this is really not a reference to what we call hell, but of death itself. Which is why modern translations won't use hell that much in these places. But hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. In other words, when he is going to die, it's like the grave or death itself is just waiting for him. in reference to God's judgments. It stirreth up the dead for thee. So this is where the dead are. Even all the chief ones of the earth, it has raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. In other words, they're like the dead kings are all sitting up waiting for you to come because of how much of a tyrant and wicked king he has been. All they shall speak and say unto thee, in verse 10, art thou become like us? In other words, this is the idea. This is all poetry. It's like the dead kings are saying this, but they're not literally saying it. They're all saying symbolically, you who are full of glory, the great and mighty king of Babylon, how could you come to where we are? Have you really come to die like a normal mortal person? Verse 11, thy pomp is brought down to the grave. Your arrogance and the exaltation of the king of Babylon has been brought down. But notice thy pomp is brought down to the grave. So we're talking about a grave in context, but I want you to notice already that this makes sense with the king of Babylon. Now, of course, as we go on through the context, the devil, of course, isn't in view here because the devil doesn't have a grave, couldn't go to a grave. He's not a physical being with a physical body. And this also demonstrates that it is talking about Sheol, the place of the dead, not what we call hell. It used the word hell, but that's not what the Hebrew word really means. At least it doesn't mean what we think it means. It's talking about where the dead go, and the dead would go to the grave as well. But now, it says, thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of the vials, the worm is spread under thee, like a rotting corpse, and the worms cover thee. This is this poetic language of where God is bringing the mighty king of Babylon, who's been wicked, exalted, and powerful, but wicked. Now notice the idea of a worm spreading over thee, this rotting carcass, would not obviously apply to the devil, who does not have a body. But it does make sense if it's referencing the king of Babylon. But now the verse in question. In verse 12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? Now, we'll read on, but let's take a look at this verse by itself. Now, so most people get to this verse and they think, oh, now it's talking about the devil, or they think it has been alluding to the devil really the whole time. But we notice so far that nothing that has been said would even make sense with the devil, and it even tells us that it's talking about the king of Babylon. But let's take the word Lucifer itself. Now, the word Lucifer actually isn't a personal name, like Bob, Larry, AK, John. It's not a personal name, Lucifer. We think of it as, but this is not what it actually is in the Hebrew. Actually, strangely enough, the word Lucifer is actually from the Latin. The King James took the Latin form of the word. It's not actually the Hebrew word. They took the Latin form. Lucifer is actually a Latin word. The word itself, as well as the original Hebrew word, means a light bearer. A light bearer. That's what it means. It's not a personal name. It is a word that simply means light bearer. So this is why modern translations, and I'm going to move this over here, but a modern translation like the Legacy Standard and several other modern ones won't say Lucifer, because why would we use the Latin word that means light bearer? Just, if we're going to make it into English, just use the English light bearer or something akin. And actually, the word is actually a word that was applied to Venus, which is a star, of course, that can be seen. And so, for these reasons, light bearer as a star bears light, or being applied to Venus, you'll find these translations that actually just call it that. So the Legacy Standard, for example, says, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. Now, so even though it is common and very popular to refer to the devil as Lucifer, but this isn't a name for a person. This was a name of a star. It is simply a word that means a bearer of light. So what I'm saying is that the word Lucifer never was meant to be the personal name of anybody. Now, what is being said about the king of Babylon is saying something about the glory that he had. Even King Nebuchadnezzar was called the King of Kings by Daniel, which is also applied to Christ, because these are just simply descriptions that are often applied to kings. But so, understanding the actual meaning of the words, how you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you have weakened the nations. Now, I believe what is happening here is just simply an analogy. This is a comparison. Now, it has been used in poetic language, as we have seen. But here it says, you are the star of the morning, son of the dawn, you have fallen from heaven. I believe this is an analogy of a star that appears in the sky of glory, but then soon falls in the sense that it disappears. So it's the idea of a star falling, but this is poetic language. Stars don't literally fall from heaven. But this is always the idea of someone that is exalted way up in the heavens like a glorious star that falls, because God is bringing judgment and wrath upon Babylon, is going to bring him, representing the whole nation, down. Now, before we go on, but let's think about this. Now, some would say, but this would apply to the devil, because men wouldn't be exalted up in the heavens like a star. That would be something like the devil would do. No, this is actually typical language that is said about a variety of wicked places or people in the Bible. In Matthew chapter 11, for example, in verse 23, where Jesus is rebuking another city for its wickedness and rejecting him, he says, "And Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? You will descend to Hades," which is also the same word for Sheol. It's the Greek form of that word Sheol, translated hell in the Old Testament. But it's the same idea. In fact, Jesus is very likely alluding to the passage in Isaiah. So, will you be exalted to heaven? So Capernaum was a kind of a lofty city in many ways. But he's saying you're going to be brought down to the grave, to death itself. In other words, God is going to bring judgment upon you. So it's the same idea. Now, we know we're not talking about Satan here. He's talking about a city that is exalted. But it's this language of being exalted up in the sky, and that's what it means. The sky is also called heaven in the Bible. So exalted way up, and it's all its glory and arrogance, but God is going to bring it down. Also, Obadiah in chapter 1, the same thing is said about the descendants of Esau, the Edomites. In verse 4, it says, "Though you build loftily like the eagle, though you set your nest among the stars." Now, here again, we're up in heaven, the sky, that is, the atmosphere with the stars. So, "Though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares Yahweh." Same idea. But this isn't talking about the devil himself. But this language, this poetic language, which is used of powerful people or nations or cities, where they're exalted up in the sky in heaven, but God brings them down. So, in Isaiah 14 and verse 12, this is just using this kind of language. But it isn't referring to somebody as the name Lucifer. The word Lucifer is just a Latin word, but the actual meaning is just light bearer. And probably this is not the best translation in the King James to bring a Latin word in. I mean, what need is there? But so in verse 12 here, "How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn." You were this glorious star, but you're being brought down, cut down to the earth. Now, we'll continue on here for a little bit, but some would object and say, well, in Luke chapter 10 and verse 18, Jesus says something similar about the devil. He says, "And he said to them," Jesus said to his disciples, "I was watching Satan fall from heaven like lightning." They say, you see, isn't that the same language? Well, it's not a question of whether things that could be said about mighty, powerful people could be said about the devil. The question is he referring to the devil in Isaiah chapter 14, and there's no evidence that he is. But anyway, this is not referring to a time in the past, really, the distant past. Jesus is talking to the disciples about how they had went forth under his power that he had given them, authority, to cast out demons and work miracles. He had sent them out previously, and they're returning from that, and they had been casting out demons. And in other places, Jesus says that this was fighting against the devil in so doing. When Jesus cast out demons, he said that he was casting out the devil because he's fighting against his kingdom. And so it said, though, the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said, I was watching Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Jesus isn't referring to the past, the devil literally falling out of heaven. He's referring to the devil symbolically falling from heaven by their conquering of the demons. But even if it's using the same language, but that is no indication that in Isaiah 14 it's talking about the devil. You can't just say, well, something similar is said about the devil in this other place, so it must be the devil here. No, that has to be demonstrated from the text itself. Okay, so let's read on. How you have fallen from heaven, O star of the morning, son of the dawn. You have been cut down to the earth, you who have weakened the nations. But you said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north. This is talking about the arrogance of the king. He's going to make his kingdom so powerful. It's like he's ascending to heaven itself. And some people have objected and said, well, but no man could do this. This has to be the devil. No, I just showed you scripture where this is said about cities and other people. The Edomites, and even Capernaum. This is poetic language still yet. Raise my throne above the stars of God. Verse 14, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. This is that he's going to reign as if he is unstoppable, like God himself on the earth. Nevertheless, you will be brought down to Sheol. Now, I'm reading from a modern translation, the Legacy Standard. But again, you know the King James will say hell. But the word is Sheol. This is the pit. This is where the dead go. This is where dead people go, not the devil. The devil does not go to a place called Sheol in the Bible. But the king of Babylon would. So once again, this is evidence against the idea that this is talking about the devil. To the recess of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you. They will carefully consider you, saying, is this the man? But remember, a lot of people apply this to the devil in these statements. But this is being said to a man. The devil is not a man. Those who see you will gaze at you like they will be staring at you in perplexity, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble? In other words, is this the king who was so powerful and put fear into all the other nations around him? Who caused kingdoms to quake, who made the world like a wilderness? In other words, he laid waste the nations. He just wiped them out like trees, just cut them down and made them into a wilderness, turned forests into wilderness, and pulled down its cities, who did not allow his prisoners to go home. No mercy for the prisoners of war. All the kings of the nations lie in glory. That's talking about them in their tombs, each in his own place. But you have been cast out of your grave. Well, the devil doesn't have a grave. But the king of Babylon would, like an abhorred branch. In other words, to be in their tombs was a symbol of glory for kings. We know, like the Egyptian pharaohs, but he's not going to have one. He's going to be cast out. This is what kind of shame God is going to bring to him. But that wouldn't refer to the devil. Clothed with those who are pierced with the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit like a trampled corpse. You will not be united with them like other kings who had a glorious burial. He said, you will not be united with them in burial. Well, that doesn't apply to the devil. The devil isn't going to ever have a burial. He's not in a body. Because you have ruined your country. You have killed your people. May the seed of evildoers not be called upon forever. We could go on, but there is no evidence, and only evidence to the contrary, that this is talking about the devil. Now, some people will still concede that it's talking about the king of Babylon, but say, well, but it's kind of behind the scenes alluding to the devil, because the devil is behind his wickedness after all. But that's just a theory. It's true that the devil's influence is behind other wicked people and wicked people in general. But so anything that is said about any wicked person in the Bible could in some way be said about the devil. But the point is, what does the author intend? And there is nothing in the text that says it's talking about the devil. Now, it is a tradition, but the text does not say it. And I'm in the business myself of just wanting to know what the author of whatever passage I'm reading in the Bible intends to communicate, who he intends to talk about. And the text just simply isn't about the devil. So the word Lucifer doesn't even apply to a personal name, and it certainly doesn't apply to the devil. And that's the only passage in the Bible that actually uses the term Lucifer.